Canon just announced their newest cinema camera, the Canon C80. The physical design is nearly identical to the Canon C70, with a few key changes which we will discuss in this video. Unlike the Canon C70's Super 35 4K sensor, the C80 sports a 6K full-frame sensor, which is the same stacked sensor technology you will find in the Canon C400. There are a lot of recording options with this camera. If you want to film full-frame raw 6K, you can do so up to 30 frames per second. With XFAVC intra-frame recording, you can shoot an oversampled 4K image up to 60 frames per second. If you switch to the long GOP compression format, you can shoot 4K up to 120 frames per second. And just like the bigger brother, the C400, the C80 also has a triple base ISO: 800, 3200, and 12,800. And this is probably the most noteworthy feature with this camera. So we definitely wanted to test it with the one day we had to play with this camera. So we rented a bar, recruited a pool player, and with a really minimal crew and lighting setup, mostly just using a few tubes, we shot a handful of different setups to show how this camera can perform in low light situations. In all of this sample footage you're watching, every 24 frame per second shot was filmed in the 6K RAW mode, and all of the slow-mo was shot in XFAVC. Throughout the day, we used all base ISOs from 800 to 12,800. And everything was shot in C-Log2, and then colored with a simple conversion LUT from C-Log2 to Rec. 709. This camera has a new updated autofocus, CMOS AF2. I used it for basically all of my shots in continuous autofocus, and if the camera was focusing on the wrong thing or just not what I wanted to focus on, I would tap the LCD screen to focus on and track something new. And I also often tapped to rack focus, which the camera does very smoothly. Probably the most well-known fault with the C70 was its flimsy screen. And after a while, Canon started shipping the C70 with a reinforced screen. This camera, the C80, comes already pre-reinforced and much sturdier out of the box. It also has a little locking mechanism so that when you close the screen shut, it will stay shut in your bag. The screen is also brighter. According to the representative at Canon I talked to, it is roughly 30% brighter than the C70. During the shoot day, I used both the built-in C80 screen and an external monitor, but I was not using the external monitor because the C80 wasn't bright enough. I just wanted a bigger display when we were making lighting decisions. The C80 screen was plenty bright for me when we were shooting in that bar, and was also plenty bright for me when we went out to the streets to film this B-roll. However, it was fairly overcast, so I have not yet had an opportunity to test the screen in direct sunlight. So here are the three base ISOs: 800, 3200, and 12,800. With these tests, we were changing our ND filters and our f-stop, trying to get roughly the same exposure at each base ISO. Now in this 12,800 clip, there is quite a bit of noise. My understanding, based off what Canon told me, is that to get optimum noise performance in the shadows, you actually want to shoot below your base ISO. The base ISO is where there is the most dynamic range, but if you want to prioritize for shadow detail and less noise, you should expose with an ISO that's below your base, which will take away some dynamic range from the highlights, but give you more detail and less noise in the shadows. So if we were to expose with a ISO of 1600, our base ISO should be 3200, so that way our actual ISO is lower than our base. That is if you are optimizing your settings for the least amount of noise. So taking all that information over to our noisy clip shot at 12,800, if we change our settings to expose this shot at 4,000 ISO, which is still really high, but now lower than our base of 12,800, you can see that the shadows are much cleaner. So I tried to keep that in mind when shooting this pool footage when I was jumping between all three base ISOs. But we did not just want to film in the dark, we also brought our guy outside so we could film some run and gun, doc style, natural light B-roll in the streets. So let's talk about lenses. So with the C70, you were always able to use those full-frame RF L series lenses. They were just cropped, so your effective focal length was different. Now, with the C80 and C400, you can take advantage of those L series lenses and get their actual focal length in the full field of view. For this shoot, we chose to use Canon's new 35mm prime and their 24 to 105 2.8. So we also got a chance to play with the power zoom adapter for that 24 to 105, which has a speed control setting. Here it is slowed all the way down to minimum speed, and then turned all the way up. I was using those buttons in the morning, but then someone from Canon showed me that you can actually control this via the new joystick on the back of the C80. This is one of the small physical changes to the body. Going from the C70 to the C80 is this new joystick, and you can program it to tilt up to zoom in and tilt down to zoom out when using the power zoom adapter. And although we did not have time to play with it, Canon's new PL to RF adapter, which allows metadata pass-through from certain cine lenses to the body, is compatible with the new C80. The camera has 2 SD card slots, just like the C70, but unlike the C70, it doesn't just have HDMI, it also now has SDI, in this little nub on top of the camera, which makes it much more compelling as a B or C camera to productions that rely on that connection. The C80 also has an Ethernet port and built-in Wi-Fi. We did not have time to play with either of these, but I look forward to testing the Wi-Fi functionality and potentially controlling the camera wirelessly in the future. This camera also has a multi-function hot shoe terminal. This is compatible with a range of accessories like the Tascam adapter that allows you to add full-size XLRs if you don't want to adapt to mini XLRs on the side of the camera, or you could use a cableless shotgun mic like the Canon DM-E1D stereo microphone. And just like the C70, the C80 also has a huge quality of life feature, internal NDs. 10 stops of internal NDs, so that no matter how bright it is outside, you do not need a matte box or screw-on filters. You can still get shallow depth of field by stopping down your lens in nearly any situation. This camera uses BPA30N and BPA60N batteries instead of the older BPA30 or BPA60 batteries that you would find with the C70, the C200, C500, and C300s. One of the few features that people may have wished for that is not present in this camera is IBIS. This camera does not have in-body image stabilization. It does have digital stabilization, which we did not personally use on any of these shots. But the 24 to 105 lens that we were using did have lens stabilization, and I did have that enabled for the entire day. The camera should be shipping in November, and if you want to place your pre-order, you can do so at the link below. Thank you, Adorama, for having me on for this exciting video. Let me know in the comments what you all think of the new C80.